Hello, everyone. My office got a little bit bigger, but we are back for another customer story. And with me today is Matt Schwark from Key Benefit Administrators. Matt, how are you?
I'm well. Yeah.
All right. So, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, your background, where you came from?
Yeah, I'm the Vice President of IT and Security from Key Benefit Administrators. We are a healthcare benefits firm out of Indianapolis, Indiana.
And part of this is you came into this organization fairly recently, right? How long have you been with Key Benefit?
Yeah, I've been with Key Benefit for 14 months. I hired on in October of 24 in light of, kind of a review of the IT infrastructure at Key Benefits, and came in to help them put together a strategic roadmap. So as part of that strategic roadmap, you had some non-technical reasons that were starting to kick things off. Tell me a little bit about when you got in there and what started to lead in the key factors towards KBA coming over to Expedient. Yeah, so Key Benefit Administrators had previously engaged with Expedient for DR, disaster recovery. They actually had implemented disaster recovery out of Pittsburgh.
Okay.
And so there was some familiarity there, but I'm coming on board in 2024. The CIO had gone on sabbatical. Mm-hmm. And so the CIO actually had taken over the oversight of IT infrastructure. And so at that time, they did a review of where KBA was at. KBA is a 50-year-old company. And so there was a couple of factors that I did a rapid assessment of. And one was just the real property of KBA. Actually, the utilization of the space that we had, which was fairly low after the pandemic. We had gone vastly remote, right. And so we weren't efficiently using the space. We had some legacy or legacy equipment within the data center, our on-prem data center. We were looking at CapEx expenditure, and I knew from the real property, kind of walking through the office space, that there was probably a corporate headquarters move in the future for KBA. We signed our contract, I think, in January and February. We were notified that they were actually moving their corporate headquarters. So that wasn't a determining factor, but it certainly weighed heavily on the ability for us in IT to be agile, be resilient. So that was some of the factors that.
And as part of that move, you're looking at it and saying, okay, well, if we were to move to a new building and we needed to build out some sort of data center space there's a lot of capital expenditures that go into that. I have to make sure that there's power resiliency, network resiliency, the space itself, racks, cooling, all those things. How much did that have an effect on some of that evaluation?
Yeah, it had a big impact, especially the flexibility in facilities. I didn't know where we were moving to. I didn't know if we were going to sublet. I didn't know what the architecture was going to look like. I didn't know if we were looking at moving some of our satellite offices. We didn't have DR in those spaces, but I was looking at going serverless in those spaces outside of the comms closet and networking. So just to give us the most flexibility in responding to unplanned change from a facilities utility perspective, that was a huge factor, as well as just the environmentals, the maintenance, the quality of life for our staff on responding to those, failings. All of that weighed into the determination to potentially look at cloud.
So when you're starting to look at cloud, you mentioned this is a 50-year-old company in the financial services space. Those are typically not the most technologically progressive companies out there. So when you're starting to talk about a cloud migration, what are the concerns that they have up front?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, they definitely had found success in a process and they stuck to it. Sometimes when you have success, it's don't touch it, right? Mm-hmm. Don't touch it. Don't cause interruption. But to take this company to the next level, to make it futuristic, to look at compliance, there was going to have to be some changes made. Obviously, we're looking at some significant capital expenditures, as well as just the redundancy, resilient power, backup generators, and not knowing where we were moving to. We had the luxury of either owning or managing the property we had historically been at. And now we were moving into a more efficient space, which meant we were going to be a tenant, limited my ability to have some say so how that was.
When you're having this conversation about cloud, what were the options you investigated? Obviously, you had DR with us, so I'm sure there was some discussions there around co-location. Did you look at any other options? How did those kind of play in, and how do you, like, what makes Expedient the right choice against those other options?
Yeah, we looked at really all options and multi-vendors. We looked at Hyperscale.
Mm-hmm.
We looked at private cloud. We looked at colo. We looked at doing it ourselves. And, you know, I discussed earlier today that when you mention the word cloud to an IT staff, it's almost like they go through the stages of grief, you know, and by the time I came in, they had already been in denial. They were already angry, and we were at the stage where they were bargaining. So we had to walk through those stages with them. Obviously, their concerns initially were, what does this mean for me? Like, what does moving to cloud mean for me? And we were, you know, in my time there before we made this move, I knew that there was a significant quality of life improvement that could be had by moving to the cloud, one direct hyperscale or private cloud. I don't think they realized that initially. And so I had to walk through them and let them know that we're not trying to reduce staffing. What I'm really trying to accomplish is improving their quality of life and allowing them to focus on strategic improves for the business, and not spending 15 hours a day on drive replacements or air conditioning failings or just the normal data center. And with the vast majority of those folks, I think after the pandemic, we were 95, 98% remote.
You choose Expedient, you choose the VMware private cloud with Expedient. What was the team's response to the decision to choose VMware private cloud versus, say, native Azure or native Hyperscale? And then kind of what makes that transition easier for them?
Yeah, so we were a VMware shop. And initially when the team and I were discussing the cloud, they wanted to colo, right? We had some licensing. And one of the things that Expedient allowed for us to do was either bring our own licensing or leverage the Expedient relationship with Broadcom to use their licensing. So that was it. We had to walk through that. Ultimately, we made the decision to bypass the colo and move to private cloud, which was a great decision. And kind of going back to your last question, we used Expedient's technical team as a force multiplier for our staff. Okay. One of the factors that I considered was our professional development and our skill sets for moving to hyperscale. The lack of technical support without going through a partner or a vendor. And with Expedient, we could leverage the technical staff, really was a major factor, and ultimately was one of the reasons why we were as successful in migrating our data center. And I think it's important to mention that we migrated our production data center in one night.
And that kind of brings me to our delivery team. And I know on a lot of these customer stories, we talk a lot about them, and I cannot say enough great things about them because they are handling we do these migrations all the time. And I think for a lot of organizations, when they're looking at a cloud migration, they're potentially going to do it themselves and learn lessons that people have learned many, many years before, or they're going to bring in someone to do it and it's going to not go as well. There's things that are going to be missed, but because we've done this so many times, it becomes successful. So how is working with our delivery team through that process, and kind of what does that walkthrough look like?
Yeah, when we made the decision to move to the cloud, I think there was a lot of pressure on the technical architecture group to have the answers to everything. And we probably should have leveraged the technical team at Expedient earlier. But once we did, it was a very open discussion around options and capabilities, and the technical staff had answers, right? And if they didn't have the answer immediate, they very quickly came up with the answer. They had the resources to reach out to get the answers that they needed to make our project successful. And so I wish we would have engaged with them a little bit earlier. But when we got on that call, I think we started at 7:00 at night on I think it was the 24th or 28th of May. They were on with us until 5 the next morning. And every time we came up against an obstacle, they very quickly were offering to help, giving us options, talking through our architecture with our admins, and coming up with solutions. And my team did a fantastic job, but the Expedient team, that group effort was the reason why we were able to move our entire production environment in the middle of the week in one night.
So after that, how did your architects and your technical folks feel about that transition? They feel like, oh, this is actually the right decision?
Yeah, I think so. I think very quickly, our team knew that this was going to be the right decision. It was going to give us resiliency. It was going to give us capability. It was going to eliminate or alleviate some undue stress. And of course, there was a period of normalization. We had some latency the next day that we had to work through, and we very quickly got on a call with your staff and worked through those. And then one of the concerns I always have with migrating to the cloud, and when I've done this a couple of times, is just IOs on data, data intense. And we did see some of that, but Expedient had options, and we very quickly identified those databases that were more intensive, and then moved them to a different storage capability with Expedient, and that solved the problems.
And I think that level of optionality of, okay, the thing that we went to the first time wasn't it. Okay, let's move you over here. I think if you were to have done this on-prem and migrated to a platform and it didn't work, now you have to go back to the business and say, hey, we moved to a thing, it didn't really work, and we need to do this other thing, and now that's an additional spend versus just, hey, let's just fix this problem right now because it's there.
Yeah, again, back to agility, the ability to make a decision, make a change, and roll it back if it doesn't work, or scale. I don't have to go through procurement. I don't have to go through bidding. I don't have that. That is where we needed to take the business, and certainly that capability. I didn't have to wait 6 months. I mean, now there's discussion about lead times being 6 months for some hardware. Memory's moving to GPOs, and the costs are increasing. There's just a lot of factors there that the cloud gives us a lot of capabilities.
So you mentioned that you were a VMware shop on-prem. You're moving to VMware private cloud. How much was maintaining the security and operations models, making sure that those were consistent from on-prem to us? How much did that play into that decision?
Yeah. So unlike the hyperscale, we had resources to go to. And not only did we move our corporate data center to the cloud, we moved our corporate headquarters, we also stood up a completely new security solution with another partner out of Indianapolis. And so being able to get them on the phone, we stood up a new endpoint antivirus, we did SIEM, we 24/7 NOC, monitoring, log collection, having Expedient staff and our security vendor staff able to get on a call and work through some problems with my staff was key. And we did all of that within that same 2 or 3 months.
And you mentioned you did look at Hyperscale, but did you bring anything into that? Did you say, hey, that actually fits some of these workloads, but it didn't fit all of it, and the majority should go into one place? How did that work out?
Yeah, so we did move some of we have very specific use cases that we did move to Azure. But what I didn't want to, in a rapid improvement process, I wasn't sure if our applications needed to be refactored for Hyperscale. And so some of our web stuff and some of our web app stuff, we did move to Azure. But there was a lot of unknown. And what I didn't want to do is just rent VMs in Azure. And then have to have my staff continue to maintain those. And so some of those factors just made more sense to move to a private cloud solution where we could reach out. We had, force multiplier your staff, helped my staff. We could solve problems with applications a little bit quicker. And I wasn't just running high cost VMs with Azure.
Yeah, we see a lot of that, of people who want to get out of their data centers and they just pick their stuff up and drop it into Azure, and it works. But they end up spending 20 to 30% more doing the same things they were doing on-prem, and they don't get any of the management benefits. Yes, they don't have to deal with the hardware and the hypervisor on the bottom, but they are still managing every last bit of those VMs on top.
Yeah.
So by doing this migration, you also mentioned disaster recovery. You had the disaster recovery list. You continued that. When did you execute a test?
Yeah. So we actually had enacted a DR test in 2024.
Okay.
Or a DR, a DR test. We enacted DR. It wasn't really a test. We actually had a reason to enact DR in 2024. And so in 2025, I actually used the migration as a DR test. The practices were all the same, and we were migrating all of our production data, all of our production environments over to the new data center. So we broke our DR sinks. We recreated them with the data center in Carmel, and then we resynced those, and then we actually used the cutover as the DR test to bring production back up in the new data center, in the cloud data center. And so that was it was a great experience for my team to actually rebuild that, get a better understanding, figure out the gaps. Because again, from a professional development perspective, that was another reason why Azure and Hyperscale didn't make the most sense. I didn't feel overly confident that the staff had the resources and skill sets to be able to support a complete Azure move, right? With moving to Expedient, I've got just a gamut of resources that I can go to and solve problems to help my team and be successful.
And then by having that full disaster recovery test as part of that migration, how does the business feel about your capability to recover now? Did they respond to it in any way like, oh, hey, you actually moved everything? Oh, we barely noticed.
Yeah, it's one of those things you don't want them to notice, and they did barely notice. I mean, we had a little bit of latency the next day, but yeah, it did give them confidence in our ability to enact a DR. And actually, a week or so ago, we had a little bit of a blip, and that immediately came up. Like, do we fail over? Because they knew we could, and so we've been in cloud for about 7 months, and there were still some learning. We actually reviewed our backup procedures. We actually reviewed our RTOs and RPOs. We looked at what systems were critical. Were we backing up to DR? We did a review of that as a part of my coming on board, and after the cloud migration, because our complete architecture has changed. And we did find a couple gaps that we're correcting. But yeah, the capability, I think the confidence is there, the capability is there, and we're going to do more DR tests.
You're going to do full failovers?
We will do full failovers at the ball.
I think that's just one of probably a dozen outcomes, but what are the big outcomes that you've seen as part of this migration to things like high availability, resiliency, and security compared to what you were doing on-prem?
Well, certainly the quality of life has improved for the staff. The amount of hours I think the IT staff was spending supporting an on-prem data center and reacting to infrastructure, like, kind of aging infrastructure that we were going to have to make some spend in. That's all eliminated. And I think the concern about what does this mean for them has largely gone. Now they're working less hours on just we're relying on Expedient to take care of our infrastructure, to be able to monitor the hardware, to respond to those hardware issues, work through procurement, and all my team's not having to do that. They are able to focus on taking the business to the next level. And we had a very aggressive 2025. We've got just as aggressive 2026, and freeing them up to be able to accomplish that is key to the success of the business.
So I guess looking forward, sort of what do those advantages do for the business? Like, what are the things that I always joke about how no one has time for anything. And part of what we do is give people time. All the technology and all the support and everything that we do is really to give you time.
Yeah.
So what do you see your staff doing with that time? Is it automation? Is it, deeper integrations to the business? What do you see going on there?
Yeah. So it's a little bit of all of that. They're able to work on projects. They're able to respond to unplanned projects, which always happen.
Yep.
We are looking at strategic AI initiatives.
Yep.
We are looking at doing more integrations with our business applications. Instead of having these very siloed, we're looking at creating some workflows. And so my team has time to do that. We're looking at analytics. We're looking at software development team is doing more with AI and test and dev. So I think it's just a lot of, not having to spend as much time working on the underlying infrastructure issues. And then trying to plan if we did do this again in-house after a move, we're going to have to build up all new data center with probably a light staff. We would have no time for projects or improvements. It would be just purely sustain. Moving to the cloud has given us an opportunity to work on improvements.
And I think that's a tremendous point to end on. We're going to send it over to live Q&A, and Matt will join me, and we'll take your questions coming up here. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Matt. Matt was here. He'll be back in a second. My office did not actually get that much bigger, just so you guys know. Expedient's doing well. Not well enough to give me a stage that I go to every single day. Matt, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. I think there was a lot of, obviously you had some really good insight there. We did get a number of questions from the folks in the audience. So I kind of wanted to go through this live Q&A and kind of dive in here a little bit. The first question makes a ton of sense. What did the cost comparison actually look like? We talked a lot about, hey, you looked at Hyperscale, you looked at us, those sorts of things. People wanted to know a little bit more than just, hey, what does this actually mean? Like, hey, it was cheaper. They would like to know like a little bit more detail there.
Yeah. I'm happy to share. We were talking about this, what this looks like for small, mid-sized enterprise companies, as well as manufacturing, logistical companies, or just business. There's some differences there. But when we initially did the total cost of ownership, we initially thought that moving to the cloud was going to be about a 14% increase month to month annually. After a year, it's been mostly a wash. I think we're within $5,000 of what we were spending annually for on-prem and supporting, data comms closets and other satellite offices. We did that consolidation during this move. So we were really close. Now, that total cost of ownership does not include the staffing side of this. So the force, using Expedient as a force multiplier, as I mentioned in our discussion, I feel like we've increased our staff, but I don't have those staffing costs. We've got experts in some of the, Cohesity, the backup solution. We heavily rely. I'm not doing the backup. I'm not doing the firmware upgrades, especially with the current political status. making sure all our stuff is patched and up to date. We rely heavily on Expedient to do a vast majority of that. So it doesn't include staffing. It doesn't include break fix. So, we were going to have to do a CapEx expenditure in building a new data center if we did it ourselves. So it doesn't include all of that. It was purely operational expense. That included compute and storage, disaster recovery, networking, utilities, backups.
I want you guys to know, I want the audience to know, Matt actually crunched numbers for you. He's giving you real honest numbers. That man looked at Excel just now.
Yeah, I'm looking at Excel. We actually have a total cost of ownership Excel spreadsheet that our architecture staff, Bob Hoffman and James Taylor, put together. It's got management and monitoring, SQL Server licensing, VMware server licensing. So it ended up being largely a wash. Total cost of ownership for annually.
Yeah, and I don't know if you remember any of the numbers from what you were looking at for Hyperscale. I think some of that was in there, but if you don't, it's been. I totally get it.
Yeah, I don't. And then we did a hybrid environment for those. And I think this was a question later on, and hopefully I'm not doing a spoiler, but we did move some of our compute to Azure for those things that I needed to scale and then potentially scale back quickly, whether it was seasonal or just test and dev. We did some of those in Azure that gave us the flexibility to do that. But all of our core compute was moved to Expedient. And when we did that move, just to give the audience some reference, we moved, we did roughly 200 servers in the migration. It was about 2,300 gigs of RAM and about 400 virtual CPUs is what we moved.
And that actually leads into the next question. What a wonderful segue. How long did the actual full evaluation and migration planning process take? Because the migration only took a night and you moved all of that overnight, which was honestly a testament to our delivery team and their success. But also, you don't just go, we'll move it on Saturday and then just pick everything up and move it. There's planning and things that go into that. So there were some questions about how long did it take? Was it you planned for a year and a half? Lay out a little bit more of that timeline there.
Yeah, this is a great question because there was a ramp up to that one night. So I don't know we started the discussion in September of 24. So between September of 24 and late January of 25, we looked at infrastructure as a service. We looked at private cloud. We looked at colo. We looked at public cloud. We looked at doing it ourselves. So we looked at Nutanix as an option to our virtualization. And sometime late 25, and I don't remember exactly when we found out. I speculated we were going to move our office, and when we were notified, I think late December or early January. I knew this had to get done quickly. So we made the decision in September or in late January of 25 that we were going to move forward with Expedient, what we were actually going to do, what we were going to do for licensing with the impending office corporate headquarters move. And so between really February and May was all just focused planning on what that move looked like. And there were some, I think I mentioned there were some hiccups. We started that project, and we're probably going to answer a question later on, but Expedient was on EEC1. In the middle of that planning session, EEC2 became available.
Had to keep you on your toes.
Yeah, had to keep us on our toes. So some of the work we had done in prepping for that, we had to start all over, or we were going to have to do this migration again a year later. And
which I think is helpful that we didn't say, oh, no, don't tell them about any of that stuff. Just get them moved and then we'll figure out the migration later. It's let's solve the problem now. If they're willing to rethink the actual build process, if they're willing to rethink how we're going to do the migration or what needs to happen as part of that migration, it might save them hours of work later on instead of just getting the problem solved now and then having to redo it later.
Yeah, I don't look at it exactly. I'm glad they said something. I don't look at it as a oversight or a negative. I'm glad they said something. I'm glad we were able to make a decision early and only have to do this move one time. And I don't know exactly, but they may have let us into EEC2 a little bit earlier than they did
Maybe we did.
to help us out. So I don't know that for sure. But I do know as soon as it became available, or as soon as they thought it was going to become available, they mentioned it to us and gave us an option. So yeah, so that was the little bit of the gap that I measured. So we lost probably 3 weeks worth of work in having to resync to EEC2, but it did save us probably 2 months or 4 months worth of planning a year later.
And I think that's sort of the math that goes into something like that. Yes, it's not going to be fun. We're going to have to resync everything. It's going to take 3 weeks, but this is 3 weeks and you do it the first time instead of doing it now, going through all the, machinations of getting everything moved over and then having to rethink about this entire process again. I think you also looked at the math the same way I would and say, okay, I'll lose 3 weeks to save 4 months.
Yeah.
Right. It's that one's pretty
disrupt the business
straightforward.
potentially again. And we wouldn't have, we never would have, I don't believe we would have gotten those considerations or those options if there was a big move like that in Azure, right? It just wouldn't have been an option and we would have had to have moved at a later date. So yeah.
A lot of questions came in about compliance things. You mentioned, you're a healthcare benefits company. That comes with a lot of regulatory compliance, those sorts of things. So did you have any specific compliance or regulatory considerations? Obviously things like HIPAA and other, data privacy things. Did anything specifically come up and help with that decision?
Yeah, so we are SOC 1, we're working on SOC 2 and HIPAA compliant. So those are some security frameworks that we are regulated by. Obviously, we do the best with PII and PHI as well. We do adopt best practices from other security frameworks. We look at high trust, we look at NIST, ISO with 853. So we adopt best practice from across those. But yeah, especially in the physical security side, we did have some compliance, regulatory compliance that were considered during the review.
Did any of that play into that versus something like Azure where you have less insight to that physical side?
No, it was just both solutions have the trust center and they're both compliant. So it's a little easier with in gathering that information for our audits with Expedient. Obviously, we're reliant on the trust center with Azure. And then if there are any questions, certainly we can have someone jump on the phone and get those answered much easier with Expedient than we could with Azure without going through a partner. But we knew both were compliant, which, is why we use, really in some footprint, we use both.
That compliance, I don't want to make this transition into something like licensing, but a lot of the conversation came up around Broadcom and how did you handle that transition? Obviously, you guys came over to us on the VMware private cloud and we were able to help along that path, but how did you handle and how are you, I guess, planning on handling that transition? Is this something that you're looking at and saying like, okay, yeah, we're going to keep going with this because it's the thing that we know, or is there still some like questions around whether or not you want to continue using VMware?
Yeah, so there's some capability to bring your own licensing to Expedient. Now, at the time we did this migration, there were 2 types of VMware Broadcom licenses. Yep. There's kind of a basic license and an enterprise license. The licensing that we had at the time, we could not bring with us.
The vSphere Foundation one, I believe.
Yeah.
Yep.
So at the time, we looked at that licensing. We were also looking at Nutanix, but because of the timeline for the move, it made more sense to just move our VMware instance to Expedient because it was going to be easier. We had more experience in it than trying to introduce a new platform. But I think long term, I'm keeping my thumb on the Nutanix tech to see if that doesn't make sense in the long term. Plus, I wanted to utilize Expedient's influence with Broadcom if they have, they have more than I have, to potentially manage our licensing costs, so that I didn't potentially see the increases that I could be targeted with individually, and Expedient could leverage their whole customer base to try to get a better pricing. So in the near term, that made more sense to us. And we did eat a little bit of licensing costs with VMware to move to Expedient's licensing model.
That's the sort of thing that we run into. Literally, historically, we've run into this before because people couldn't bring any licensing at all to us. But that was the sort of thing where it was always like, hey, if we want to move into this, there is a licensing move. So if you are a VMware Cloud Foundation customer, you can bring that licensing to us and we land it on our private cloud hardware, and we still manage all of the, firmware, ESXi, vSphere, Cloud Foundation patching that goes along with that. So there is some flexibility now in that to say, hey, I don't have to, eat this cost because I have to rebuy licensing or I have to rebuy something on the other side. You can bring that over. The vSphere Foundation licensing was not allowed. So we found a lot of customers who did sign up for that one to maintain compliance and renew, kind of weren't able to do that. And that has been another set of discussions to have.
Yeah. And we had done that. We had done that agreement before we started looking at. So
yep. There's never a perfect storm. There's never a absolutely perfect time. I mean, we've had a number of customers recently who they were closing their building, they're closing their headquarters, which is where their main computer room was, which then kind of freed up that capital mindset of, hey, this is the building that we're in, and we got to keep up with all that. So there's other cost savings and other moves that can somewhat offset some of those things. So it's a conversation to have for sure. During this move, though, you treated this as a DR test. And by the way, I love that everybody's doing this now. I've now heard this like 3 or 4 times. Like, hey, when we migrated over to you guys, we wrote it down as our DR test for the year. If I can make your DR test and audits easier, I love that for you. And so as part of this, what sort of backup or any gaps that you saw in the backups in the DR plans as part of this migration? Because obviously you're changing where you're doing all your things and some of the platforms that are involved with that. So what did that look like post migration for you and your business?
Yeah, and I mentioned there was a gap, and really the migration and the review of our TRPOs and our disaster recovery, looking at categorizing our services and our servers, our solutions in a tier, tier 1, tier 2, what's critical, what's not critical, coming up with our business continuity and doing that review, as a new vice president, but also just in this move, just to review, because we re-architected really everything. Some of the gaps we found is that we had some underlying solutions that were enabling our software to run that weren't included in those tier, like Citrix. We have some Citrix environments that we weren't backing up to DR, and had we failed over. So doing that review, doing that review and prep, plus we were backing up to tape internally and replicating to DR. We moved to Cohesive, so now we're disk to disk, which significantly increases our recovery time. And then leveraging, since it was a new platform and we had a new skill we had to learn, leveraging Expedient's staff to help us, set that up and manage that, was a great improvement. And then using the actual migration as a disaster recovery incident gave us some confidence that we could do it. And additionally, there was about a month gap, just for the audience, if you're doing this, there was about a month gap where we had to do some notifications, just because there was a little bit of lack of confidence in our backup solution, because we had to shift our DR from Pittsburgh, which is where it was located, to our new production site in Carmel and Expedient here in Indianapolis. And so we shifted that. So in essence, we lost DR for a period of time while we resynced, and we had to, we didn't account correctly, or we had to the bandwidth that was going to be utilized, because now we were backing up to DR during the day, but now we had to, or during the night, but now we had to do some of this during the day, and we had normal business operations. We had apps. So we had to adjust for that. And luckily we were able to do that to get those things in line. And then we actually used the DR to fail over to our new production site. Once we did that, we had reestablished DR and then resynced with the new tier list of critical applications, and then resync those. So there's a little bit of period while you're doing that your RTOs and RPOs could be affected or impacted, and you probably should notify. But it largely it was not a long time.
And I think that's sort of a testament to working with somebody like us, where we know when we do these sorts of migrations, when we do these sorts of cutovers, it's not necessarily you had I don't want to say a unique situation, but you had the situation where you already had DR here and you wanted to move over to a different site for production, but use that as the DR, use DR as the failover method to get there. So it turns into this like sort of, rearranging some chairs to put things into the right place. And at some point you're going to have a pile of chairs in the room, right? So you're going to have to put them all back in the right places. So I think you're absolutely spot on in saying like, yeah, this is also still a migration. Like, yes, we did the cutover in one night, but this is all part of that planning and thinking through and making sure that we're going to be as resilient and protected as possible all through that entire process. You kind of tipped it a little bit earlier about running some things in Azure and running some things with us. So there were some, thoughts about hybrid environments, and what does that hybrid architecture look like day to day? Is this a thing where you're touching Azure all the time, touching Expedient all the time? Like, walk me through a little bit of your, management and monitoring sort of, time needs as part of managing a hybrid architecture. Excuse me.
Yeah. So I just want to mention that, one of the aspects that we also looked at was just decentralizing our risk, right? Having everything in one building, kind of the old way of thinking. We're more resilient today because we've spread out the risk, and we don't have it all in one building. But so we looked at use cases. So in those, this is a complicated question because of the staffing piece. The Azure is a great solution, AWS is a great solution. We looked at those specific use cases, software dev and test, apps, web potentially, where we might need to scale quickly and then we might need to scale back. And so having that flexibility to turn stuff up and turn stuff off and stop paying for it within a month or two, especially for seasonal use, that is the use case that we are using for Azure. So, but for those core, which is largely a lot of what we do, those core services that we provide, those business applications that we provide, we're doing those in Expedient because I can get better support. I can get quicker responses. If I don't understand something, I can get somebody on a phone. It gives my staff peace of mind because they're still involved. In some cases, they're managing vendors. Vendor management is kind of another aspect of this as you decentralize and go to cloud and go to SaaS. So yeah, it was a lot of different things, but that's the use case we use for Azure. And then we have the core, most of our core servers. We're going serverless and we're looking at zero trust. We're treating our offices just like they're someone's home. We go global secure access. We've eliminated VPN. We're really trying to ramp up our security for our staff. We can tap into new markets. We're not, I know there's a lot of push for return to work, but we can tap into talent all the way across the United States. And I want to be able to support that from an IT perspective.
I think one of the other things is this is what we've been saying for years, the right cloud for the right workloads. If you want something that needs to scale up and scale down, hyperscalers are great at that. That's why they were so successful early on, because everybody thought they were going to spin their stuff up and spin their stuff down, but they didn't. right? They had apps that they ran 24/7 that they never shut off. And then all of a sudden, this cost savings of I'm only using it when I need it and I'm not using it when I don't goes away. And our ability to help blend that together, we have the ability to help with connectivity between our environments and Hyperscale, where we can also help lower egress fees because we're going over, express routes or cloud interconnects, or there's a third one. I'm blanking on the name right now, but you're not going out to the internet pipes of the hyperscalers, which lowers those egress fees. So there's also some cost savings there as well. And so if you want to look at the right way to do cloud, that's where we can come in and help navigate that instead of you trying to figure it out on your own. We want to make sure that you're successful, and that's where our expertise comes in. And I'm going to end with this one. If you could start the migration over again, what would you have done differently? And what is the thing that you would absolutely have done the exact same way?
I think I mentioned this in the discussion. I would have engaged the Expedient technical staff earlier to relieve some of the pressure on my staff to answer questions. I wish I would have asked about the potential for new services to be available that might impact the migration, like EEC2. I probably would have asked a little bit more about the intense IOs for some of our databases and some upscaled storage for those databases. I don't think when we initially started the conversation, some of that was available in EEC2, but then it became available in mid planning. And so just keeping our pulse on that a little bit. But when it did happen, when we did have some latency, we were very quickly able to say, hey, we got a problem. And it's one I'm really sensitive to because it tends to be the one that fails back. I feel most often is database usage because they're used to high IOs on-prem and then they move to the cloud. But the pure storage, the performance disk solved all of our problems. I wish I'd had a little bit more time. I mean, we did it in 4 months. But I wish everybody wishes.
I always think about that of like, what would I do if I had like more time to do this? And I've done big migrations like this. There was also periods of time where all that planning took like 18 months. And I'm like, we could have done this planning in 6. This wasn't that hard. Everybody was just humming and hawing too much. Like, how do we kind of blend that? I think 4 months is tight, but also we do it all the time so we can help make that as successful as it needs to be. But I think I think some of this is also like, would more time have just caused more decision fatigue or caused more like, okay, well, what if we did it this way? Or what if we did it this way? You get into analysis paralysis.
Yeah.
I do this a lot when if I'm about to go make a major purchase, I get into like, oh, okay, I've researched everything on earth. Is this really the right decision? I'm always like second guessing myself. Like, no, there's probably more information. No, there's not.
Yeah,
you either pick the thing or you don't.
It is a great point. I don't know that we needed more time, but when you're balancing a corporate headquarters move and the data center move, that data center needs to be out of there. You start moving.
You don't have a choice on that one. You have to get out, or you're not going to have a place to stay.
Yeah, but yeah, I don't think it was overly uncomfortable, but we definitely had to push a little bit to get it done. But yeah, minor things. I don't think there was anything major. The Nutanix, I'm very interested in that solution, and because I don't like the pressure that I'm feeling from Broadcom. Obviously, we're leveraging your relationship with them, but had I had more time, I might have given that a little more consideration. But yeah, nothing major, and we can still look at it in the future.
Exactly. We're the best at both. So if you want to take a look, we can absolutely do that.
Yeah.
Matt, I want to thank you so much for your time. This has been a really great interview. This man opened Excel for you so he could give you the actual TCO numbers. I just want you to know that is a real above and beyond thing. Most people say, no, it's like 30%. No, he was giving you real things, real numbers. I super appreciate that. So thank you, Matt. Please join us later this month or next month, we're working on a webinar with maybe a company we've mentioned a few times here and what they've got cooking up. You're not going to want to miss that one. Again, Matt, thank you for all your time, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, AJ.